In the heart of the 20th century, a nation struggled with the ideals of equality. But as is often the case, change comes from the most unexpected quarters. We all recognize the case, Brown versus Board of Education, the landmark 1954 Supreme Court ruling that shook the pillars of racial segregation in American public schools. But what do we truly know about this pivotal moment in history? To appreciate the magnitude of Brown, we must first journey back to 1896. The Supreme Court's decision in Plessy versus Ferguson established the doctrine of separate but equal. This ruling gave the legal nod for racial segregation, so long as facilities for blacks and whites were equal. But were they truly equal? The stark differences in infrastructure and resources told a different story. Enter young Linda Brown, a third grader from Topeka, Kansas. You might not know that Linda had to walk 6 blocks to her school bus stop and then ride a mile to Monroe Elementary, a black school, despite living near a white school. Linda's father, Oliver Brown, in an act of defiance, tried to enroll her in the nearby white school. And as expected, she was denied admission. This denial set in motion a series of events that would change America. The Browns, supported by the NAACP and its chief legal counsel, Thurgood Marshall, took the fight to the courts. Lesser known is that Linda's case was one among 5 similar cases from different states, all consolidated under the banner of Brown versus Board of Education. Parents testified about the psychological damage segregation caused to their children. And in a lesser-known fact, social scientist Dr. Kenneth Clark presented the doll test. Black children were shown dolls, one white and one black, and they overwhelmingly preferred the white doll and attributed positive traits to it. A heart-wrenching revelation of the internalized racism these young minds experienced. The case presented a moral and legal challenge. Could the justices go against almost 6 decades of separate but equal? The nation awaited with bated breath. Thurgood Marshall masterfully argued that the very institution of segregation was inherently unequal, and therefore unconstitutional. The fight for educational equality wasn't born overnight. It was a culmination of various incidents, legal challenges, and strategic moves over the years. Throughout the early 20th century, numerous black communities protested the appalling conditions of their schools compared to the well-funded white institutions. These protests were more than just about buildings. They were about access to quality education. Enter Charles Hamilton Houston, the unsung hero often referred to as the man who killed Jim Crow. Houston meticulously crafted a multi-year strategy to attack segregation. He mentored a young Thurgood Marshall, instilling in him the belief that the law could be a powerful tool for change. Before Brown, there were several key cases that set the stage. One such case was Missouri ex rel. Gaines versus Canada in 1938. Lloyd Gaines, a black student, was denied admission to the University of Missouri's law school. The court ruled that either the state provides Gaines an equal facility or integrates him into the existing one. Taking a leaf from this, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, under Houston and later Marshall, began to target graduate and professional schools, forcing states to either construct costly new facilities or integrate. With each case, the facade of separate but equal began to crumble. States found it increasingly burdensome and impractical to maintain this duality. Another precursor to Brown was Briggs versus Elliott in South Carolina. Here, the black community originally sued for equal transportation, not integration. They were fighting the fact that black students had to walk miles to their schools, while white students had buses. The fight was tough. Reverend J.A. Delane, who supported the petitioners, saw his house burned to the ground. Despite the challenges, this case became one of the 5 rolled into Brown versus Board of Education. Each of these incidents, protests, and cases slowly chipped away at the foundations of segregation. They showcased the tangible and intangible inequalities faced by Black students. The momentum was building. Behind the scenes, the NAACP's legal team was meticulously gathering sociological, psychological, and educational research to reinforce their arguments. They knew that to overturn Plessy, they needed a watertight case. By the time Brown versus Board of Education reached the Supreme Court, the stage was set. The nation was ready, the justices were ready, and history was on the precipice of change. The NAACP's legal team, led by Thurgood Marshall, was not just battling a doctrine. They were up against deeply entrenched societal beliefs, prejudices, and the weight of legal precedent. Racial segregation was not just in schools. It was woven into the very fabric of American society. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a cultural one. One of the most significant challenges was the composition of the Supreme Court itself. The justices were divided, with some openly sympathetic to states' rights and segregation. Behind closed doors, the justices debated fiercely. Initial conferences after the first arguments in 1952 suggested the court was far from unanimous. They struggled with how to address the weight of the Plessy versus Ferguson precedent. Outside the courtroom, the press and public opinion were also divided. Many Southern newspapers ran editorials staunchly defending segregation, while threats and hate mail poured into the offices of NAACP lawyers and plaintiffs. Marshall and his team faced personal threats. Traveling in the South, they often had to employ decoys and change accommodations to ensure their safety. A critical turning point, albeit a somber one, was the sudden death of Chief Justice Fred M. Vinson in September 1953. Vinson was believed to favor maintaining the status quo on segregation. His replacement, Earl Warren, possessed a more progressive outlook. Warren believed in a unanimous decision to underscore the court's resolve. He worked diligently behind the scenes to ensure that the court spoke with one voice. The case was so complex that the court ordered a rare second hearing or re-argument in December 1953, requesting specific details on the framers' intent when drafting the 14th Amendment. The pressure was immense. The team had to delve deeper into historical documents and legal precedents, leaving no stone unturned. Through all these challenges, from internal court divisions to societal pressures, the unwavering commitment of Marshall and his team, along with the courage of the plaintiffs, continued to shine. And then, on May 17, 1954, Chief Justice Earl Warren delivered the unanimous verdict. The doctrine of separate but equal was overturned. Racial segregation in public schools was declared unconstitutional. The decision sent shockwaves. While it was a monumental victory, the road ahead was still challenging. Integration wasn't immediate. There were fierce resistances, political maneuverings, and sadly, even violence. Yet the Brown verdict was the catalyst. It laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement and subsequent landmark legislations. Today, as we see children of all races walk into schools together, it's essential to remember the sacrifices, the fights, and the unyielding spirit of those before us, for they paved the way for a more equal and just society. Brown versus Board of Education wasn't just a case. It was the embodiment of hope, change, and the unyielding pursuit of equality.